Trauma affects the brain in many profound ways. When a child experiences trauma, their brain response system goes into overdrive. Here are some of the key areas impacted by trauma. The amygdala. Think of the amygdala as the brain's fear center. Trauma can cause it to become overactive, leading to heightened fear and anxiety responses. This can make a child easily startled or constantly on edge, impacting their ability to relax and concentrate in school settings. Next is the hippocampus. Think of the hippocampus as the brain's librarian. The hippocampus is involved in memory and learning. Trauma can impair its function, leading to difficulties with memory and learning new information. This can affect the child's academic performance and ability to retain what they just learned in class. If you have difficult learning, you can fall behind your peers, which can lead to feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem, such that you don't want to be in school. Think of the prefrontal cortex as an orchestra conductor, guiding the performance of a symphony. It helps maintain a sense of order and control in our brain's performance, operation, and function. However, when students experience trauma, this symphony in their brain can be disrupted. It's as if the conductor, the prefrontal cortex that is overwhelmed or even absent from the podium, leaving the music ensemble to perform without guidance. Since the prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive functions like decision-making, impulse control, and emotion regulation, when the prefrontal cortex is overwhelmed, there tends to be challenges in managing emotions, controlling impulses, and making thoughtful decisions. These brain changes can result in behaviors that may be misunderstood in school settings, as these youth tend to struggle with attention, memory, and emotion regulation, all of which can hinder school behavior and performance, which can cause them to want to avoid school altogether. As we mentioned earlier, triggers can be anything that brings back a traumatic experience, sensation, or behavior for a person who has experienced trauma. Trauma triggers are powerful. They're reminders of past traumatic events. They can cause intense emotional and physical reactions, often without the student fully understanding why. In a school setting, triggers can be anything from the teacher's tone of voice to chaos in a crowded hallway. Here's how trauma triggers work in the brain. Sensory memory. Triggers often involve sensory memories. For example, a particular smell, sound, or sight that is associated with a traumatic event can cause the brain to react as if the trauma is happening again, even though it's not. There is also the amygdala activation. When a trigger is encountered, the amygdala, it becomes activated, signaling danger and initiating a fight, flight, or freeze response. Next, there is a cortisol release. The body's stress hormone cortisol is released when the amygdala is activated, preparing the body to respond to the perceived threat. This can result in physical symptoms like an increased heart rate, sweating, and even hyperventilation. After the cortisol is released, there's a cognitive impact. The prefrontal cortex, which we said earlier is like the orchestra conductor responsible for rational thinking, can be bypassed during a trigger response. This means the student may react impulsively or irrationally as their brain prioritizes survival over logic. Now, let's go over some examples of triggers and the behaviors they might cause in school. Loud noises. A child who has experienced domestic violence, for example, might react strongly to loud noises, interpreting them as a sign of imminent danger. They might become anxious, cry, or attempt to even leave the classroom. Crowded spaces. For a student who has been bullied, a crowded lunchroom, locker room, or a school bus can be overwhelming and anxiety-inducing. They might avoid transitions between classes or prefer to stay in less populated areas or just exit the school altogether. Next up, authority figures. A child who has experienced abuse, let's say, from the caregiver or other authority figure may have difficulty trusting authority figures like teachers. They might react with defiance or withdrawal when questioned, redirected, or just simply approached by a teacher. Folks, listen, these triggers and behaviors highlight the impact of past traumatic experiences on a child's behavior in a school setting and emphasize the importance of understanding and addressing their individual needs to create a safe and supportive environment for them. These behaviors can be misunderstood as intentional disobedience or defiance, but they are actually coping mechanisms for dealing with intense emotional distress. Here are some common disruptive behaviors linked to trauma. Aggression. A child may lash out physically or verbally when they feel threatened or scared. This can be a defense mechanism to protect themselves from perceived danger. Withdrawal. Some children might shut down, becoming unresponsive or detached from their surroundings. This can be a way to escape from feeling overwhelming stress and anxiety. Defiance. Traumatized children may refuse to follow instructions or engage in classroom activities as a way to exert control over their environment. This behavior can stem from a need to feel safe and in control. Hyperactivity. In an attempt to manage their anxiety, some children might exhibit restlessness or disruptive behavior. This can be a way to release pent-up energy and cope with stress. Perfectionism. Some children might become overly focused on achieving high standards to avoid criticism or failure. This can be a way to gain approval and feel value when they may feel less than or not enough. It's important, folks, to approach these behaviors with empathy and understanding, recognizing that they are just simply expressions of the child's internal struggle rather than deliberate misbehavior. When teachers better understand trauma, it opens the door to greater empathy, compassion, and consideration that can be used to create a more welcoming space for the trauma-exposed student. The welcoming space may take away some of the fears and anxieties that can cause children to want to avoid school. In a later module, we'll deep dive into some of the best methodologies and best practices for creating this kind of welcoming environment. So let's take a look at how far we've come in our school avoidance journey. So at this point in our conversation, you know what is the difference between school avoidance and school reluctance. You understand the manifestations, both physically and psychologically, of school avoidance. But what does school avoidance do for the youngster? What purpose does it serve? Well, that's the code, C-O-D-E, we get a chance to crack. There are 4 functions of school avoidance. And we have to understand that these functions are the reason why our youngsters may commit to school avoidance behaviors. So let's take a look at that code. What is it that youngsters get from these behaviors? In the acronym CODE, the C stands for comfort. Our youngsters may have the goal of avoiding unpleasant physical symptoms or distressing situations. Some examples of these things that could cause the distress, it could be being on the school bus. Also, folks, I want you to think about those social interactions where they get a chance to interact with their peers with less adult supervision, such like the playground, the lunchroom, certain aspects of the classroom before class actually starts. And also, let's not forget the distress of not being able to do schoolwork because of some type of learning difference. One other factor could be people. It could be other kids at school, certain adults at the school, or just a general feeling of discomfort about being around a lot of kids all day. So I want us to understand that instead of dealing with that, the youngster may seek comfort in avoiding these situations altogether. They may find solace in staying away from school and maybe staying at home, maybe going to a friend's house, or otherwise avoiding the distressing situation. So a lot of times this comfort can look like opting out of school altogether. That's our second function, O, opt out. Youngsters who experience school avoidance may opt out of school situations that may be evaluative, that may be painful, that may be something the youngster simply doesn't want to do. They just may opt out and not attend because of tests, reading out loud in class if they're not a great reader. Maybe it is athletic performances in gym class. Could be having free play on the playground or some other type of recreational or sports activities. I want you to think about school avoidance in two different streams. One stream is social. They don't want to be around certain social situations, even classes like gym. That's probably one of the classes where it's most social. So maybe they don't like gym, so they avoid gym. But it's also vital situations like a test, or perhaps it's that public speaking project that they have to complete, and they're really afraid about it. So remember, this is some of the pain that the youngsters may wish to opt out of. So the C and the O in our code model are negative or aversive, representing things that can cause feelings to escape or to avoid. But sometimes the code involves things that can feel positive as well. That brings us to D, direct attention. Youngsters may crave direct attention from parents, or maybe significant others like siblings, or maybe their peers. And sometimes a child may wish to receive attention from this other person or significant other, and they think that avoiding school could be the way to do it. If they're having a hard time getting attention from this person outside of school hours, they may decide to try to get that attention during school hours. So the motivation to not go to school is to be with this other person. They might like the idea of feeling needed by a parent who may have problems, so they'll stay home from school to assist that parent. They may stay home from school to get a parent to themselves, and it's just them and that parent. It could be that maybe there's a big brother, big sister that came back from the military or college in their home, and they want to hang out with them. Maybe it's a relative who they would like to be around. It could be so many other things that they're trying to receive attention from: parent, relative, peer, or a sibling. The last letter of our code model is E, which stands for escape. In escape, the youngster may be seeking tangible rewards to make staying home more appealing. Children may find that they can obtain tangible rewards that make staying home more enjoyable and comfortable than going to school. So weighing the two, the child decides to stay home as opposed to going to school. Like the safe, cocoon-like feeling of being in the bedroom with all their favorite things. It could be they just want to stay home and have the house to themselves if they have a number of siblings that they have to share the house and share certain items with. It could be that staying at home allows them to be able to do the things that otherwise they just simply wouldn't get a chance to do. Cook their favorite meal, watch whatever they want to watch on TV, play whatever they wish to on the video games. So no matter the motivation, I want us to understand this escape. It's an opportunity for them to avoid their stresses, do something that they want to do in a way that they wish to do it. So there can be a list of other means of escape, and let's just go over a few of these. They may wish to play in online gaming or participate in other online activities that parents wouldn't approve of. So if they're doing it while the parents are not there, that gives them a measure of autonomy. There may be certain movies they may wish to watch that the parents don't approve of. That allows them to watch those things in peace. But also spending time with perhaps a romantic partner or significant other without their parents that they enjoy. And lastly, it could be wanting to spend time with a friend who's not in school, who may have been suspended or otherwise is not in school. They get a chance to hang out together. But in either case, folks, escape is to run away. And that is the motivation for engaging in school avoidance in these instances. It is pleasure. So remember, some of the functions are for pleasure. Some of the functions are to address pain. But from a functional perspective, there are 4 functions of school avoidance in their code. Part of helping them is figuring out their code and why they're engaging in these behaviors. And then, once we figure out the why, that can help us help them work through some of the ways to move past this. In this learning module, we will identify some potential personal challenges for teachers in supporting students experiencing school avoidance. We will reflect on the individual barriers and biases that can impact teacher-student interactions. Also, we will discuss utilizing self-regulation techniques in order to manage our own emotions, maintain composure, and foster a calm, supportive environment for students struggling with school avoidance. Finally, we will discuss the importance of self-care for you and your students in order to successfully mitigate school avoidance behaviors. So, let's take a minute to look at ourselves. As teachers, I would wager we love school. School is who we are, is what we do. We probably loved school ever since we were students ourselves. And perhaps that is why we were drawn to this great profession. So it may be difficult for us to understand why a student would want to avoid the very thing we love, not want to be at the very place that we find familiar, friendly, and full of possibilities. That would be school. We must understand that the value we place on school may not necessarily be the same value that students place on school due to school avoidance issues. When the values between us and our students are not congruent, there can be values dissonance. The values dissonance can occur when, on the one hand, you may want greatly to give students that are experiencing school avoidance a break. But on the other hand, you want to make sure that you're upholding and enforcing the rules and regulations that make up school policies and your state regulations on unexcused absences. These two perspectives can present a dilemma. So let's explore what this values dissonance can look like. Values dissonance is where we have a conflict between our professional duties and obligations that we are required to based upon school policy and procedures and our own personal values, what we believe to be right and just. Teachers and school staff are human beings, and as such, we come to this job with our own personal values that may have been instilled by our parents, teachers, or maybe we picked them up from the larger culture through media or what we may have developed from our own lived experiences as adults. It is typical to have a multitude of values that make up our belief system. That's okay. But we have to resolve those values that may provide dissonance when it comes to supporting students struggling with school avoidance. Now, let's take a look at 6 value dissonant factors that could provide challenges to teachers in their support of students who may be struggling with school avoidance. The first one is the value of strict discipline. Perhaps the adult in your lives growing up may have said you don't go to school, you get punished. Or maybe they made statements like, kids who cut school are delinquent thugs who need to be locked in juvenile detention. But it also can be our second factor, the value of academic achievement. We may come from families where we believe that you get the education to get your vocation. We believe that academic achievement is something that is a young person's job, only job, primary responsibility until they graduate from high school. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, that's a value judgment. The third value judgment is independence and resilience. For example, for the student who may be experiencing bullying, we may think things like, so what? Kids are bullying you. So what? If no one wants to be your friend, you go ahead and be your own person. You go over there in the corner and eat your lunch by yourself. Does that sound familiar? The value expressed in these statements is that youth must toughen up and stay focused on school. No need for friends. You're not graded on friends. You're graded on test results. Pragmatically, the parents who told us this, maybe that's true. But again, that's a value judgment nonetheless. Now, let's discuss the value of self-reliance. Our country was founded on rugged individualism. One of our country's symbol is the bald eagle, a bird that typically soars alone. In the value of self-reliance, we may believe that students who are struggling should just pick themselves up by their bootstraps, tap into their inner strength, to just get on with it, bounce back from their issues, and get to work at school. The prevailing thought here is to stand on your own. Our fifth one is the big one. That is stigmatization of mental health issues. This is a big one because this value extends well beyond the classroom and into our wider society. It's very interesting how many adults seem to have empathy towards a youth who may sprain their ankle playing basketball, as opposed to a youngster who may have anxiety disorder. So we have to understand that if we stigmatize mental health, then we just may not be very empathetic about mental health issues. The last value judgment is cultural norms. How many of you have heard the stories from the elders in your family that may have sounded like this? When I went to school, I used to have to walk barefoot in the snow, or I had to walk uphill both ways to school. These stories are generational values about school that are passed down to us as children that we may still harbor as adults. The value, school is so important that you have to do what you need to do to get to school, no matter the hardship, no matter the challenge. So, as an adult, what are your values around school and your values around school avoidance? To help us identify these values, how about we do a self-assessment that allows us to assess on the scale of being supportive or perhaps less supportive with students that are struggling with school avoidance. Now, to get the most out of the assessment, we must answer with authenticity. We tend to be our most authentic selves when we respond with the gut level reaction. The longer we take to complete the assessment, it may open us up for rumination. We may move away from our authentic selves in order to bifurcate our opinions. This is why we suggest you complete the assessment tool in no more than 2 minutes, folks. Yeah, that's right. I said no more than 2 minutes. So here are your directions. Please read each question and then rank each item from a score of 1 to 5. 1, you strongly disagree. 5, you strongly agree. Next, add the value score for each question and tally up your total score. Remember, your gut level response tends to be your most authentic response. At this time, please pause this video and complete the assessment. All right, welcome back. You had 10 questions in total. The higher the score, the greater the likelihood of the values dissonance regarding school avoidance. Let's evaluate your responses. So if you score between 10 and 20, it suggests a minimal values dissonance. So there is some dissonance, but it's not really a whole lot. But that does not mean that it does not still need to be addressed and effectively dealt with. If you score between 21 and 30, it suggests you may have a moderate values dissonance. In this sense, you may want to take some time to pay a little bit closer attention to some of those areas where you might have more dissonance than perhaps is needed to support youngsters. The score of 31 to 50 may also suggest that we may very well project our own feelings, our own sentiments, our own understandings, and our own values about how we see school and how we feel about school. Folks, there may be a gap in our ability to harmonize and empathize with our youngsters based upon how we were socialized. And that may be the reason why there may be disparities. Listen, please let me be clear. There are no bad assessment results. Your results are simply a reflection of your values based upon the thoughts, memories, motivations, perceptions, and beliefs on school avoidance that perhaps you were taught. Any assessment result is not the end, but rather the beginning of us having a greater understanding of ourselves and where our values stand on school avoidance. The point of this assessment is not to have any person feel bad. On the other hand, the point of the assessment is for us to see what could possibly be potential blind spots that could impede our ability to fully support our students that may be struggling with this school avoidance issue. Remember, school avoidance is an issue that most kids simply cannot solve on their own, and they need your support. They need your resources. They need your help in cracking the code.
Wow, thanks for that clarity, Anthony. In order for us to do the work to help our students who are experiencing school avoidance in impactful ways, we must look inward to identify any potential barriers that we may bring that have not been examined fully. Being able to reflect on individual barriers and biases that could potentially impact student-teacher interactions and recognize challenges we may face in supporting our students is one of the first critical steps for our students experiencing school avoidance. One strategy is to utilize self-regulation techniques. Self-regulation techniques are strategies or practices that teachers can use to manage our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in order to achieve a desired outcome or maintain control over our actions. This strategy is helpful when we're dealing with values dissonance before engaging with the student experiencing school avoidance. When we learn practical strategies to manage emotions, maintain composure, and approach challenging situations with empathy and resilience, it can foster a calm and supportive environment for our students. This next strategy is one that, as teachers, we may sometimes overlook or not see it as important as the many other things we need to focus on for our classroom, and that's promoting self-care and well-being. Prioritizing self-care allows us as teachers to recharge, manage stress effectively, and maintain a positive attitude, ultimately enhancing our ability to provide quality education and support to our students. In the classroom, we can model by doing yoga or meditation as a part of circle time or a bell ringer activity. These can set the tone for peace and calm to start the class or help with student transition to the next class or activity. Just like we have sanctuary spaces in our homes, like our bedrooms or gardens, we can also consider creating space inside our classrooms where a student can do some self-regulation or self-de-escalation when they become anxious or overwhelmed. Can you see how the value in embracing self-care sets a powerful example for students, teaching them the value of holistic well-being? As educators, it's imperative to remember that self-care is not selfish. It's an essential component of being effective in the classroom. These strategies are not just for us, but for all of our students in the classroom, fostering a positive learning environment. So, let's commit to investing in our own well-being, knowing that by doing so, we're better equipped to nurture the potential in not just our students experiencing school avoidance, but the entire class. So by integrating our mindfulness practices into our classroom, it models for our students the value of self-care that we want them to achieve through self-regulation. We've come to the end of this module. We have spent a great deal of intentional time focusing on the 4 functions of school avoidance in the last module, but how do we crack the code? Well, we crack the code by giving them a new code to satisfy each of their 4 functions of school avoidance. We'll dig into this more in the next module of this series.